Good morning. The time is now 8:31, and I would like to call the April 17th, 2026 meeting of the Energy Facility Siting Council to order. My name's Cindy Condon. Mr. Secretary, please call the roll.
Cindy Condon,
Here.
Ann Byer,
Here.
Kent Howe,
Here.
Richard Devlin,
Here.
Patty Perry.
Here.
Chair Condon, you have a quorum.
Thank you. And Mr. Secretary, are there any agenda modifications for today?
Chair Condon, there are no agenda modifications as of yet today.
Thank you. I have the following announcements. For council members and anyone addressing the council, please remember to state your name clearly, and please do not use the speakerphone feature as it will create feedback. Please mute your phones, and if you are joining us by phone and receive a phone call, hang up from this call and dial back in after finishing your other call. For those signed in onto the webinar, please do not broadcast your webcam. For agenda item D, public comment period, there are 3 ways to let us know you are interested in providing comments to the council. 1, for those in person, please fill out a registration card and submit to Nancy Hatch, and the registration cards are in the back of this room. For those using the WebEx, you will need to use the raise your hand feature. And 3, for those on the phone only, you will need to press *3, which will alert us that you want to speak. We will go over these options again during that agenda item. If you want to receive future email notifications of council meetings, project milestones, or rulemakings through our Click Dimensions program, you can do so by clicking on the link in the agenda or on the council webpage. Look for the green box on the right-hand side of the page that says Sign up for email updates. You are also welcome to access the online project mapping tool and any documents by visiting our website. Please note that the audio and video of this meeting is being recorded and may be posted to the council's website following the meeting. Energy Facility Council meetings shall be conducted in a respectful and courteous manner where everyone is allowed to state their positions at the appropriate times consistent with council rules and procedures. Willful, accusatory, offensive, insulting, threatening, insolent, or slanderous comments which disrupt the council meeting are not acceptable pursuant to Oregon Administrative Rule 345-011-0080. Any person who engages in unacceptable conduct which disrupts the meeting may be expelled. And now let's move on to the consent calendar. Approval of the minutes. And Richard always chimes in there, but it's
Chair Condon, this is Kent. I move that the council approve the minutes of the March 20, 2026 meeting as presented and recommended by staff.
Do we have a second?
Chair Condon, this is Councillor Byer. I second that motion.
Thank you, councilors. And Mr. Secretary, can you call the vote?
Ann Byer,
Here.
Kent Howe,
Here.
Richard Devlin,
Aye.
Patty Perry,
Yes. Yeah.
Cindy Condon.
Yes.
Motion carries, Chair Condon.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And we'll now turn it back over to you for the secretary report.
I have a few project updates to start with. The first is the Boardman to Hemingway transmission line. As you're more than likely aware, this is an approved and in construction 300-mile long 500 kV transmission line from near Melba, Idaho to Boardman, Oregon. The site certificate holder is Idaho Power Corporation. Recently, the department received 2 amendment determination requests, the first on March 2nd and the second on March 8th. First one seeks the department's review and concurrence of whether the expansion of a temporary access road, not a access road, but generally temporary access road widths from 60 to 100 feet requires review for the amendment process. Obviously, through the ADR, they're asserting that it does not. This change is requested to allow a safer workspace while helping to prevent erosion and sediment from leaving the work area. The increase in disturbance area equates to a combined 31.1 acres. So, question?
No, no.
And then the second ADR seeks the same department review and concurrence on whether the addition of 4.26 miles of access roads and shifting of pulling and tensioning site location requires review through the amendment process. These changes are a result of a landowner coordination request while also providing safe construction conditions. The department is reviewing these ADRs and plans to issue a determination next week. So as you recall, the whole concept of an amendment determination request is the certificate holder can say they have the ability to do some facility modifications. They can do it and then just report that later on. The risk if they do that is we could then say that should have been an amendment. Now you're gonna have to go back and go through the amendment process. So this whole process, it's designed to allow them to make the case whether an amendment is required. Clearly, they're asserting that it's not. We review that, we put the information on the website, we give council an update, and then we do our review and either agree with them or not agree with them. And then we bring this back to council. This will be at the next council meeting where we will have evaluated these and determined whether we agree with them or not. And just, there are going to be probably a whole host of these with the Boardman to Hemingway, just as you start to get into construction. It's a different animal than, say, an energy generation facility, just 300 miles. And there's, they're actually getting on site to a lot of places that they hadn't been able to because they weren't allowed to get on site. They're getting final kind of engineering and design. So there are likely to be numerous of these in the future.
Councillor Byer?
Chair Condon, just a quick question. So these sound like minor changes, and they're all within the approved areas. But if there were, say, I increased the width of my road and all of a sudden I'm in a stream corridor, are those the things staff would flag and get input from, say, ODFW?
Yes, thanks for the question. The threshold is what we call the three coulds. Is it basically something that the council hasn't reviewed before? So could it impact a council standard that hadn't been previously reviewed? Is it impacting a condition? Would it change a condition? And I always forget what the third one is, but there's these sort of threshold questions that when a certificate holder makes the request, they have to identify that it's not triggering any of those three coulds. And typically, if there is some evidence that they want to prove, yeah, they will provide that along with the ADR, whether it's consultation with ODFW or any other kind of evidence on the record. These things are pretty thoroughly looked at. So again, it's a threshold question.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Just a quick question. So with landowner coordination, does that mean that it was a request from the landowner?
Yeah, I think a lot of these, some of them are. So, I think as they're getting onto these project sites and they're getting onto actual people's properties and they're getting some questions about, can you do it here versus there and make some changes? Some of them are going to be related to landowner desires. Others are going to just be, they're getting out there and they're recognizing the kind of engineering doesn't work with, what they had originally thought, and they're having to make some other choices.
Okay. Yeah, my question kind of centers on, is the landowner involved in that coordination, or is the certificate holder in that process and that's the coordination?
I think it depends on the particular amendment determination request, but I think probably I would say the bulk of them will likely be as a result of landowner coordination.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then Sarah sent me the threshold. So the three, I'll just read it off so it makes more sense. So the first could result in a significant adverse impact that the council has not addressed in an earlier order and the impact affects the resource or interest protected by an applicable law or council standard. So kind of the one that I'd said could impair the certificate holder's ability to comply with the site certificate condition. That's the one that I was missing. And then could require a new condition or change to a condition in the site certificate. So those are the things that the certificate holder has to evaluate, and then we also have to evaluate. And then again, the way the process works is it comes to us, we do our evaluation, and then we tell you our conclusion, and you as a council have the ability to basically say, that's fine, we agree, we disagree, or we want sort of a further evaluation of that. And we're not there for these ones.
Thanks.
And then there is one. So on March 27th, the department did issue its determination on amendment determination request, which sought the department's review and concurrence on whether a proposed 0.96 acre micrositing corridor expansion in Union County warranted review through the amendment process. So the department determined that the proposed change would not trigger any of the three coulds that I just described. An electronic notification was issued notifying the public, not a legal requirement, but something that we do for courtesy. And the determination is available on the department's webpage. And we sent to council. Okay, so we sent that determination to council. Hopefully you received that via Click Dimensions. You should receive that in your email that the determination got made. Again, in this example, one is you can agree, you can disagree, you can ask for this to be put on an agenda in the future for you to evaluate and decide if you agree with our determination or not.
Councillor Condon, just a quick question with respect to the process. The courtesy notice goes out to the public, but at that point, the decision is made. There's no public process or opportunity for the public to.
Yeah,
weigh.
this is just a transparency opportunity, but it's not a decision. This is our sort of evaluation. Is an amendment required?
Thank you.
And then the next project update is the West End Solar Project. So this is an approved but not yet constructed 50 megawatt solar generation and 70 megawatt battery energy storage project in Umatilla County. Parent company of the certificate holder is Eurus Energy America Corporation. Council approved the project in March of 2023 and established March 24th, 2026 as the deadline to begin construction. In February of this year, staff reached out to the certificate holder to remind them of that construction date. They did not begin the construction by that required date, and the site certificate has therefore expired. So at the next council meeting, we will bring this as an agenda item for you to formally terminate the site certificate.
Councillor Howe?
The county that was in, was that Umatilla, did you say?
Yep.
Okay. thanks.
Yeah, so it's, if you can kind of picture Hermiston, it's just a little bit south and east of Hermiston. So literally like 10 minutes drive outside of the city of Hermiston.
Quick question on that. Do we know why it was allowed to? Was there any communication with them?
I'm not aware. So again, we reached out to them, made sure that they're aware of it, of their requirements. They acknowledged that they knew those requirements and just didn't move forward with the project. So did not, I don't know if they articulated to us. I did not see anything.
Thank you.
And then one compliance update. This is for the Bake Oven Solar Project. This is a 60 megawatt operational solar facility in Wasco County. Parent company is Avangrid Power. So prior to the completion of construction, the Bake Oven project team made a minor update to their revegetation plan and established their revegetation monitoring plot locations outside of the actual temporary disturbance area. So when we evaluate how things are going, they establish certain plot locations to determine whether revegetation is occurring appropriately or not. So being outside of the disturbance area was not a good opportunity to evaluate how that was coming back up to being revegetated. So we obviously need the relevant data to be able to evaluate that. It needs to be within the disturbance area. After that mistake was identified by Hannah Satine, the compliance officer who's leading that one, the 5 plots were moved into the as-built temporary disturbance area. So this change has occurred prior to the first monitoring season to make sure that we have the appropriate data to evaluate to determine whether they're in compliance or not. And then the last thing on my list is future meetings. The next meeting is May 15th. We only need the Friday. It's not going to be a very long meeting. It'll be a relatively short agenda, but we do need a couple of agenda items. And because there is a short agenda and no location driver, and it has been a while since we've had a virtual meeting, we requested Chair Condon to allow for a virtual meeting. She agreed, so it'll be virtual only. And that'll make things a little bit easier for staff, at least for a month.
Counselor Byer.
Thank you. Just making sure the mic's on. And I appreciate that this is a short meeting and the burden on staff and the cost of having in-person meetings. But boy, the in-person meetings are so much more helpful. And so I think these decisions are not made lightly. It really is agenda driven, but at least on my behalf, the in-person meetings are so much more helpful, having the chance to have more robust discussions. Somehow talking to a computer screen doesn't work as well, but in this case, I fully support the decision, but I just ask that the decisions to meet virtually aren't made lightly. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Chair Byer. I totally agree. You know, it's our inclination that this should be primarily, you know, an in-person body. Even if there's not a location driver, for all the things that you articulated, we agree. So not something that we take lightly. But, you know, it is a pretty big production cycle, and it's a lot of burden primarily on Nancy, some of us as well, but primarily her. So it's nice to get a little bit of a break every once in a while.
Chair Condon?
Counselor.
So I've been on the council, I don't know how many years now because I lose track, but I just want to acknowledge the hard work that Nancy does, particularly when we have out of office meetings and the way she facilitates things. I saw her in action in Klamath County where we had an overflow situation, and Nancy did a great job orchestrating that, keeping everybody calm. And so kudos to Nancy for all her efforts and how she makes us all feel comfortable, welcome, able to do our jobs. So hats off, Nancy.
Yeah, and thank you for that. I think what many people don't realize, if you've not done that kind of work, is for a meeting, you know, even a fairly simple meeting, and most of our meetings are nothing like being simple meetings, it takes a tremendous amount of work and organization, you know, to put it together. And so if things go off without a hitch, it's because of a lot of work and effort that goes into it, and that's primarily Nancy. So I totally agree. So thanks, Nancy.
Also, the whole staff has been great. So just to acknowledge that the work is not, it couldn't be done by the council without the efforts of Odo's staff.
Thank you. And that concludes my secretary report for today. Unless you
Thank
have any
you.
questions.
Thank you very much. And just a comment, you know, as all of us have been incoming council members at one time, and it's in-person meetings where you meet your fellow council members are very important for that onboarding process and getting into the flow and knowledgeable about the projects, and conversations just in a less formal environment, asking how we all review documents and what we look for and that sort of thing. So it's helpful for a training, and we're going to be getting some new council members, I think, on an ongoing basis. So thank you for that, Secretary Cornett. And we'll move on to our next item, and which is modernization rulemaking, and it's our final consideration of that. It is an action item, and Tom Jackman, who's our citing policy analyst and rules coordinator, will present the final draft rules for consideration by the council.
Good morning. Yes, my name is Tom Jackman, and I am the rules coordinator for the council. And today we are going to take a look at the hopefully final consideration for the modernization rulemaking. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So yeah, this began, I guess, roughly a year ago with the informal rulemaking initiated by council, followed by 6 months of informal rulemaking. We had a public hearing in November, and then fairly unusual, but not totally out of the ordinary, we had a second notice of proposed rulemaking in December after we had some changes that we felt merited, and the council agreed merited an opportunity for the public to comment on the changes that resulted from the first public comment period. And so that brings us to a review of those comments and a final presentation for consideration by council today. Let's go ahead and go next slide. So let's just quickly, as a refresh, go through the changes. So I had them sort of organized into minor, modest, and more substantive updates. This rulemaking is primarily designed, we call it modernization. It's really just sort of a basket of different changes that didn't merit their own rulemaking, and with an effort particularly to, comb through the rules and pick up things that are either vestigial or just don't make sense anymore. And yeah, so we'll go through those. But, one of the things we did was just spot outlining and reference errors. Some of those are just legacy from the complicated nature of rulemaking in prior years, where you make a change and then you try to spot all the other places where that might connect to, but you don't necessarily. So we spotted some additional opportunities to make corrections there. We, removed some sort of applicability provisions that are, 10 plus years old and don't make sense anymore because the rules apply to everybody. And so it doesn't make sense to keep the sort of outdated language in there. Yeah, so go ahead and go to the next slide. Are any questions about the minor updates before I move on? No, okay. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So we had some more modest updates. We formalized a process at the request of the Department of Defense for providing them notice. We were already doing this as part of our new application process and review of new projects and amendments, but they were concerned that this wasn't a formal process and that, sort of changes could be made without notice to them or whatnot. So we, agreed and inserted that into the rule language. And then there was also a removal of a requirement that applicants and certificate holders print copies of all their various submissions. But we left in language that should the department direct them to do so, then they still are required to, for example, if a member of the public order requests that. But these, printed copies have been required for years, and it is not clear that they were being utilized. So this would seem like a relatively simple but timely change that will hopefully, save some trees and some money. Okay, go ahead and go next. Or any questions about those two? Okay, go ahead and go. All right. So some more significant updates. One of them was a sort of change to directing parties to submit data they have regarding, there's a lot of geospatial data, a lot of map data regarding these projects, and there wasn't necessarily a uniform way to submit that data. And the staff, this was a staff-driven change who, looking towards sort of unifying the submission process, standardizing it so that the staff is familiar with the data as it's presented. And that also, we have sort of the tools and the process to help the public understand how things are presented. So, we don't get into situations where an applicant wants to submit data in a different way. We're not really sure how to process it. We don't know how to help the public review that information. So there was a little bit of pushback on this during the first public comment period. No additional comments were made during the second public comment period on this. But one of the things that we emphasized as a result of those first comments was that, we're, sensitive to sort of they were doing what was easiest for them. So potentially there, additional burden from this requirement, but the hope is that by standardizing this will ultimately become, easier for everybody involved. And then the second one here, which sort of resulted in the issuing of the new notice of proposed rulemaking, was that we made a provision retroactive, which sort of is a more substantive change that applies to folks who have already got site certificates regarding a pre-construction requirement, needing to obtain all construction rights, or rather not needing, because the existing rules required that, arguably. So we clarified, because it didn't really make a lot of sense to have that requirement, that is not needed, and that as long as there are certain sort of things in place that developers can begin construction of, the initial parts of the project, assuming they have the rights for those, portions of the project. We did receive some comments on this change. We'll get to that in a second. So Obsidian Solar supported the removing of the pre-construction limitation and applying the rule retroactively to all existing certificates holders. But they argued that subsections A and B, which were in the rules, and we left them in there, are leftover provisions from that prior rule structure and did not make sense given the removal of the pre-construction limitation limits. But and they claimed that the continuance of those two subsections sort of resulted in, as they said, speculative compliance standards, and that this would increase regulatory uncertainty. But I mean, really, staff didn't really agree with that characterization. I mean, to the extent you weren't happy with these, the speculative nature of needing to prove A and B were equally true previously. Nothing changed by broadening the fact that we're allowing more folks to take advantage of the pre-construction, the removal of the pre-construction limitation, which previously applied in some cases and now applies in more cases. So these subsections A and B are just more relevant because there are going to be potentially more instances where we're concerned about the possibility of the two things that those cover, which are on the next slide. So let's get to that, and we can get into the weeds a little bit on what those are. So A and B subpoints to Rule 6, Section 5, limit access to the phase construction in unless the certificate holder can prove two things. One, that they would construct and operate the facility that they're planning to build, even if there's a change in the planned route of a transmission line or a pipeline. And then the second one is similarly limiting access to this sort of allowance to instances where the certificate holder will construct and operate the facility, even if other parts of the facility were modified by amendment. So they're both sort of getting at the same thing, which is we're saying you can go ahead and sort of jump the gun, if you will, but we're limiting that to portions of the project that you're very certain you're going to need, regardless of sort of, the variance and unpredictability that could potentially occur. Obviously, the certificate holder has a sort of vested interest in not spending however many dollars it will take to start a thing, only to not need that or to need to change it subsequent to future modifications. So they're highly incentivized to not do the thing that we don't want them to do. But we just sort of felt that the spirit of these two provisions sort of remained true, which is that, we definitely don't want to be in a situation where a project sort of gets started and then abandoned. And then perhaps we have the bonds to deal with it, but we'd rather not need to deal with it. So ideally, folks are getting started early with the sections of the project that they have high certainty are going to need. Any questions about the language that we're keeping and why staff is recommending that we are proposing that we don't go with Obsidian's recommendation to get rid of these two sections? Make sense to everybody? Okay. All right. Next slide. Yeah, go ahead and go next slide. Yeah, I already kind of went through that. We also got a comment from a member of the public, Constance Lee, who sort of, I think, perhaps misread the intent of the rulemaking and sort of made some assertions that the changes here would result in a reduction in public participation in allowing projects to sort of go forward, but projects are only going forward if they've been granted site certificates. So the opportunity for sort of public participation has effectively passed at that point. You know, whether or not a certificate holder can obtain all the rights they need prior to construction, ultimately they would need to obtain all those rights. They couldn't proceed on portions of the project that don't have the rights until they get those rights. So we're not saying that that's allowed. So the pace at which those projects are constructed, or whether they try to get things going prior to getting all their ducks in a row, so to speak, is something we're sort of leaving up to the developer. But yeah, at that point in the project, it's sort of, I mean, they said it allows irreversible project momentum, but that's the idea, that you'll have the momentum to complete the thing that you obtain the certificate for. And assuming that you're going to start disturbing the soil, we want you to finish the project. We do not want you to leave it half built. So yeah, and then there were some concerns about limited access to digital only materials. That's reference to the GIS data requirement. But again, the hope is that by sort of, you know, as I stated earlier, sort of standardizing how we're getting this material, that these digital, I mean, this data is so dense and complex, and there's so much of it that you really need the digital tools that we have available to dig into them. And the idea is that by requiring the data in a certain way, we can help people like Constance Lee, who may have questions about these projects, understand them better than we would otherwise if we were getting reams of paper, for example, that may be sort of obtuse. I mean, you have like sort of layers of data. It's very difficult to show this kind of stuff in an analog fashion, or in a sort of random digital fashion that doesn't work with the tools that we have to sort of peruse the data. So, you know, part of what's driving these proposed changes is to make things easier for the members of the public, out of concerns of being able to review that. And of course, if people have limited access to, you know, digital tools, they're welcome to, you know, come on site, and we have resources to help them review that material. Any questions about these comments and staff's recommendations?
Thank you, Tom. You always do such a great job of presenting the material. So a couple of things, and this may sound a little bit irrelevant, but not providing the printed documents makes sense. But is there any requirement for a disclosure of AI presentation, like documents come in and are created by AI? This question is prompted because of some instances in the legal profession where briefs have been written by AI with improper citations and whatnot. And I'm just wondering if
In the spirit of modernization, that I mean, it's certainly not in the existing rules, and it wasn't contemplated by this rulemaking, but I do think that is something that we should put on the to-do list to think about in terms of disclosure. I mean, obviously, this staff is reviewing everything that's submitted. It's our job to question the submissions that we receive, but I do think it would potentially be helpful to highlight, you know, take a second look at this because, you may have been given something that where an AI, hallucinated the citations or made up data. We wouldn't want to be in a situation where a developer was asked to provide evidence and they asked the AI to provide the evidence and the AI just made up evidence. And then staff is used to getting stuff that actual has real citations. Hopefully we would catch that. But yeah, that's sort of outside the scope of this rulemaking, but that's definitely something that I think we should probably note to, consider adding to the rules, or certainly requesting. I mean, we could do it via just, policy and asking developers prior to any rule changes, let us know if you've used AI for any of this.
Yes, and I'm not really suggesting it be included in the rule, but as we receive the documents that we are aware of it, even as I review the material that we get in our packet, and there are references to statute and administrative rules, just to go back and say, okay, what does that rule mean? And as you're reviewing reams and reams of electronic paper, it seems to me easier to miss those things, and where there is an incorrect citation or.
I'll turn this over to Todd, but I will just say that that's why staff gets paid the big bucks, right? Like
Yeah.
it is their job to sort of assess the accuracy and validity of what's being submitted.
Always keeping humor in the process.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, Secretary Cornett.
Thanks for the record, Todd Cornett. So I agree with everything Tom just said. I think full disclosure, AI is here. It's going to be used. There's no reason why developers should not be using it to create efficiencies in what they submit to us. We fully expect that's going to happen. And if things makes it easier and cheaper for them, we need to embrace that, recognizing the potential downside of that as well. Full disclosure, we're also at the sort of beginning stages of using AI ourselves, and Tom is our sort of leading person to do that. So Tom and Bibi and Sarah are really trying to figure out how can we use AI in citing division to also increase our efficiency. But, again, being aware of the downsides of AI and, some of the problems that can occur if you're not doing it carefully. Tom's in the process of creating, I don't know if this is the exact term, but essentially an AI agent to evaluate comments. So Klamath Falls Energy Center, we got like 150 comments. That's a huge volume, and we're on the clock to get the project order out. So we don't want AI to basically analyze the comments necessarily. I don't think we trust it yet to do that, but to sort them in a way that we can get, hundreds and hundreds of pages and boil that down into a way of what are the salient points that people are making so we can be aware of those. That's what Tom's working on right now. And I think there's going to be other opportunities in the future for us to use that. So we're I wouldn't say fully embracing it, but we're sort of at the early stages of embracing the use of AI as well.
And I appreciate that. And my question was certainly not suggesting that AI not be used, but just that there is disclosure of it. So there's some awareness of it as the information comes in. And I think that is done in other realms where disclosure is required. And
yeah,
question.
This is an interesting, and that's why I wanted to bring this up, because it is an interesting point in time. And for all the values of it, there are a lot of downsides that if you're not careful. And so we, exactly like Tom said, we want to make sure that we are evaluating the information and it's correct and accurate, and that we can rely upon whatever it is that we recommend to council.
Thank you. And then another comment, and Tom and I did talk about it as we were discussing the packet. And I do think the language could be tightened up with respect to the modification. The
retroactivity provision for the construction, right?
Yeah, the pre-construction. On the pre-construction, it for me it was clunky, if for lack of a better word, in reading it. And I was going to have suggest some language, which I wasn't very good at, but I'd like to relook at that to see if it can be tightened up just a bit.
So Yeah, I mean, we had a conversation discussing that, and I do think that it would be appropriate to sort of approve the rules pending that change. It's just a grammatical sort
Yeah.
of optimization, if you will, of that one retroactive provision. My understanding is that the
It's
chair is not
repetitive.
suggesting we change how the applicability retroactive provision would work or be implemented, just how it would be presented, in,
Yeah.
word.
It's repetitive.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a repetitive section of it that for me said, oh, these are two different things and I don't understand what it's trying to say. And so if we can just look at that, but it's nothing substantive. So
Can we look at it now? I mean, so the difficulty is if we don't do it now, then I don't know that we can move forward with
Okay.
a change and filing the notice of proposed rulemaking, which means then we have to come back at a future council meeting to validate that.
Okay.
Because we don't want somebody to make an assertion that there is a substantive change and that we've sort of, didn't follow the proper Secretary of State procedures for rulemaking.
So Tom, can you bring up in the rules itself, the
Sure,
amended
it's going to
change?
take me a second because there's like 300 pages of draft rules, but
Counselor Byer.
Sure, thank you. While Tom's working, just a couple quick observations. I think the intent of the modernization was to cut out some of the extra procedures like the digital copies, but ensuring that the public can still request
I get it.
paper copies if they need them. So in response to Ms. Lee, the paper copies will still be available on request. The other bit is the staff review of GIS and other digital materials to make sure there's some controls on that. We've heard complaints from the public in the past about the scale being wrong, about them not having access to the ability to review those digital maps. So just know that that provision is intended to help the public by giving them sort of quality controlled maps and other digital materials. So we heard that loud and clear that sometimes the mapping applications were difficult to use. So thanks to Tom and the rest of the staff for trying to address that issue.
Thank you, Counselor Byer.
Yep. Okay. Just waiting for it. Okay. I haven't shared in WebEx before, but here we go. I don't know if we can make that full screen instead. Yeah, go to the layout button. Ironically, we now need to not see Richard. Yeah, try that. It's slightly larger. Yeah, hit that. Yeah, right there. Yeah, there you go. Maximize the share content. And then I can just zoom in. Okay. Yeah, so we're talking specifically about this subsection 6 or in 3, 4, 5, 25, 6. So section 6, which is the retroactive provision we added after the previous notice of proposed rulemaking public comment period. And let me just get rid of this yellow here. So I think Cindy's concern was that the way it reads right now, this rule in section 5 applies retroactively to all site certificates and site certificate amendments previously approved by council and notwithstanding OER 345, which states that basically things don't normally retroactively apply. It takes precedent over any conditions contained in site certificate conditions and site certificate amendments that state or suggest a certificate holder must have construction rights on all parts of the site before creating, clearing, or beginning construction on any part of the site. And I will try to giving my understanding of your concern, which is that the first part of that section states that 5 applies retroactively, and 5 here is the part that says you can build even if you don't have all the rights. So, but then it says, comma, and then proceeds to sort of say that again, which is that it takes precedent over any conditions, which is what retroactively applies means. So I think, I don't know, this is a pretty common thing in rulemaking, especially when you're dealing with a sort of retroactive provision, to sort of clarify exactly what you're saying. And I don't know if even just adding IE in here to make it clear that you are just restating it. So this is retroactive, i.e. it takes precedence over all, rather than just having it read the way it looks now, which is that we're saying 2 different things when really we're saying one thing. So I don't know if that would fix it for you.
I think that would, and I apologize, I'm not familiar with writing of rules or necessarily reading them other than what I do in this job. And so I leave it to the experts. As a reader, I found it repetitive and questioned my understanding of it. Also, I think it's odd, I'll just say this, that 5 starts with for the purpose of this rule, construction rights means the legal right to engage in construction activities. And I get that, the first part of that paragraph is being
Excised.
excised,
Yes.
yes. And it just seems to me that phrase for the purpose of this rule would come after construction rights is used. But it's style and grace. I know that it's not substantive. Just I'd appreciate another look at the clarity of that, of both 5 and 6.
We could move that whole sentence down and just start with for all energy facilities, regardless of whether certificate holder does not have construction rights, et cetera, and then add a sort of a C, if you will, where we do the, for the purpose of this rule, construction rights. So it sort of tucks that definition down at the bottom. Would that be acceptable?
Yeah, I mean, I'm used to it coming after. so,
Sure.
um,
Okay. So happy to make that change. I don't know if you're catching that, Todd, but moving this so moving for the purpose of the rule, this sort of definition sentence to the end of section 5. And then, yeah, okay, I'll let you type that.
Chair
And,
Condon.
yes, Councilor Howe.
While Todd's doing that, I like the IE explanatory. What's the word I'm here?
Clarification.
Clarification, yeah.
Mhm.
That's good to have in there. It makes it clear, and I think that's a good.
To
way
what we
go.
were looking at before. Oh, we suppose that we could just insert the IE after here, after OAR 345. Okay, sure. I defer to you on that one, Patrick. So it would read, this rule applies retroactively to all site certificates previously approved by council and, i.e., yeah, okay. Notwithstanding OER 345, it takes precedence over any conditions continued in the site certificate or contained in the site certificate. That also clarifies what we mean by notwithstanding OER 345. That's all.
And a question, and I should have looked at this, but EG is, for example,
Correct.
okay. So they're not limited to those things listed there.
Correct. So we're basically saying, in other words, is how I read IE.
Okay. Okay. And that is different. If it's, for example, it
Yeah, we wanna do
introduces the
something-
idea of more.
Yeah, there could
More
be other
things.
things where we're just saying, here's this sort of legal sentence. This section applies actively. So in other words, and then we explain what we mean by that, right?
Just as long as it's not understood that it's only those, there may be other things that they have,
No, that list there is the only thing that the retroactive provision is doing. So that's the totality of what we're trying to accomplish.
okay, I just want to make sure I understand this. The certificate holder has authority to construct in the area, e.g., for example,
No, this provision, the bit in section 5 says you can start if you don't have all the rights. So we're saying that's all the sentence is saying you can start if you don't have all the rights, even if your certificate previously said you could not.
sorry,
So there's no
I'm
EG.
speaking to 5, sorry.
Oh, okay, yeah, sure.
Oh,
Oh,
6
okay,
was
back to
good.
5, yes.
5, sorry. E.g. here,
Yes,
in
exactly.
the form.
Yeah.
E.g. means for example,
Yes.
but it's not,
There could be other things that you
Yeah.
need before you can start building.
okay, thank
Those are
you.
some examples of things you might need.
Thank you.
Yes.
Sorry about that.
Patrick Rowe with DOJ. I wouldn't say it's other things you need. It's other way. There might be other ways that they can demonstrate that they have the right to engage in construction
Thank you.
activities.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else regarding the wordsmithing on that or?
Thank you for doing that on the fly,
No worries.
Counselor Byer.
Just a quick question. Could maybe we see the revised language before we make a motion? Is that possible? Or do we have?
We could
an
just table
agenda
this to another
sent
agenda
out?
later in the. well, I
Yeah,
think-
we could put this at the end so that this can be written so you can actually see the language. But I have either the motion could refer to the language on the screen, and I also have it captured, which hopefully should be consistent with that.
Okay, but just what is the
Yeah.
pleasure of everybody else? I just am visual.
No, it's easy enough to basically, make an agenda modification, sort of withhold the decision on this for now, allow Tom at one of the breaks to change that language so that we can kind of bring it up on the screen for you.
Let's do that.
And I appreciate council's willingness to do this. Like you said, this is the kind of stuff that you get the point, and they're not necessarily Scribner errors, but they're non-substantive changes, and we feel comfortable that these, would not change that. We also don't want people to kind of see, think behind the scenes, we're making these changes at the end that they can't see, and that they'll
Right.
come out in the future, in the filing, with the Secretary of State. So I think it's good to be clear on the record like this.
Thank you. Yes, let's withhold the vote then.
Okay. I
Thank
think
you.
that was the last, switching the presentation back to you, Nancy. I believe that was the end, so we can move to the next agenda item.
And you can remain in that chair. Our next agenda item is the exemption rulemaking final consideration, which is also an action item. And again, Tom Jackman, signing policy analyst and rules coordinator, will present final draft rules for consideration by council.
All right, moving along. Yeah, so this project also started last year, and we only had one notice of proposal rulemaking and a public hearing that took place just in February, so 2 months ago. And the public comment period ended at the end of February. So we are again here to present proposed final rule language to council for final consideration. Let's go to the next slide. So the purpose of the exemption rulemaking is to sort of clean up a process that isn't utilized very often, but sort of felt like it was ripe for sort of updating and optimizing based on, additional learnings and thoughts we've had. We did not have a rack for this, given the sort of modest use of these rules, and also just what we're proposing here today. The purpose of the rulemaking was to sort of clarify, I think principally, that the council could impose conditions on an exemption where it was sort of unclear. The idea behind the exemption is that this is laid out in statute, that there are certain circumstances, again laid out in statute, where folks are allowed to proceed on a project that would otherwise require a site certificate without one, upon the finding that they are exempt. And we, that doesn't mean that it's sort of, these projects are outside the scope of council. They just don't need a site certificate. So, for example, council, under the new rules, would be able to impose conditions, and such as sort of monitoring or reporting requirements that would enable the council and the department to sort of determine that whatever basis they were claiming as a reason for the exemption remained to be the case. For example, if they were, the energy facility was a certain size or a certain efficiency that qualified for the exemption, that they were continuing to report that those, continue to be true in the future. And so also in that same sort of avenue of like potential loss of exemption, we were implementing a formal sort of monitoring and reporting requirements, and also formalizing the process for loss of an exemption, which isn't really detailed in the current rule set. So nothing, unusual in terms of, state agency, loss of rights, but so we didn't, reinvent the wheel here. It would be a notice and a sort of, opportunity to respond, and then, and then resulting in the loss of an exemption were circumstances not to change. And then finally, there's this sort of just in statute, direction to the council to sort of stay up to date on one of the exemptions, which is an allowed exemption for a high efficiency cogeneration plant. And obviously efficiency is relative. And so when these rules were passed, there was a direction to the council to update that as needed. So that was also something that was done as part of this rulemaking. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So again, we had some, sorry, any comments about what the proposed rules are attempting to accomplish before we move to the public comment? Okay. So Constance Lee, same individual, not a coincidence on the name, expressed some concerns about this rulemaking. And I think some of the concerns are sort of directed at the idea that what is being proposed will enable more projects to go forward that are not sort of in the public eye. And one of the things that the comment did not address is that we don't really have a choice. The legislature dictated that certain projects are exempt from this needing a site certificate, which by definition means that they don't go through the process of getting a site certificate, which would include the public review. The department, staff, council has no sort of say in the reality of that framework. So to the extent an individual wasn't happy with this, the place to go would be, your local representative. But given that reality, what we're trying to do here is actually strengthen the ability for council to make sure that things aren't sort of go unnoticed or sort of missed, and that whatever the legislature intended by this exemption process is the extent to which somebody could partake of the ability to forego needing a site certificate. I think that sort of addresses most of the comments, which rely on sort of allegations that we're weakening the process. The exemption process by definition is a sort of bypass of the sort of rigorous site certificate process. One thing to note, though, is that projects, just because they're exempt from a site certificate, that doesn't mean they don't need to also meet all the other regulatory state and local requirements that you would need to build anything in the state, regardless of whether it was an energy facility. So you couldn't just suddenly make something that, produced, pollution in violation of the DEQ, for example. Any questions or thoughts about these the comments here?
Councilor Byer, did you have a question or no? Okay. Thank you, Councillor Condon again. How does our compliance team fit? Is it a desktop compliance for exempted facilities? Or are they visited? How's the compliance?
I'm going to
thing?
turn that over to Secretary Cornett.
Yeah, thanks for the record, Todd Cornett. It's a great question. That's one of the reasons why we're doing this rulemaking. There is nothing. A project is given an exemption by council, subject to statute and rule, and exactly as Tom articulated, we have no role at that point in time. The concern has been, some of these facilities historically were proposed, to receive an exemption just barely under the threshold. And, developers and, businesses like to expand and increase. And so the concern was that we don't know the status of these things. Some of them never got built. Is there, is there still a right to, construct this exemption that was approved 30 years ago that was never constructed? What's the status of it? And so in the past, we've gone through and tried to do the research and figure out what the status was of these, but to specifically answer your question, there currently is no compliance associated with these facilities whatsoever. The point of this rulemaking, or one of the points, is to allow some sort of compliance and oversight to assure that, if these things do get constructed and they're in operation, that they remain within those thresholds that they were, they sort of articulated to council that justified the exemption in the first place. So that's why having some conditions in there for annual reporting so that we can check on those things.
So the proposed rule clarifies that the council may impose conditions. So have we not had any conditions in the past?
There have been no conditions in the past.
Thank you.
Uh,
Any other questions from council? Councillor Devlin?
I'm just prepared to make a motion, Madam Chair.
We have one more question or comment from Councillor Howe.
And as things exist today, there's not monitoring or reporting requirements that exist for exempt facilities. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. And this will,
This would create that framework. Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where it wasn't outlined in statute that we monitor but it also wasn't sort of, it doesn't limit us from doing that either in the statute. So sort of left up to council, like a lot of this stuff around the energy facility, sort of figure out how to implement. Okay. One other comment before we get to a motion. We also had comments from Irene Gilbert, who submitted a comment that basically generally supported the rule changes, including the new efficiency threshold. However, concerns are raised that just because this facility was exempt, that it would also doesn't mean that it wouldn't impact land use, traffic, et cetera, in ways that if a project were otherwise not exempt, we would potentially impose conditions or ensure compliance with certain things. And there was a request for sort of monitoring and reporting requirements for exempt facilities regarding some of the council standards. But again, it's sort of the same theme here, which is that we are limited in scope in terms of what we can do. And we are essentially, I think, doing as much as we can, given the statutory framework. So if any concerned citizen wanted council to do more, then that would be at the direction of the legislature regarding this subject. Go ahead and go next slide.
I had one quick
Oh, yeah, sure.
follow-up question.
Go ahead.
Not regarding that, but back on the reporting and monitoring requirements, is that going to end up being retroactive to existing exempt facilities or only for new exempt facility?
That's a great question, and this would not be retroactive.
Okay.
Can it not be retroactive?
It's definitely more difficult to do a retroactive provision that is sort of imposing a burden. And there's a sort of higher threshold to do that. The other, for example, in the modernization rulemaking, we're saying you can do something, and we're saying that right is retroactively to folks who previously were restricted. They don't have to do it. They don't have to start building just because they don't have all the construction rights. So that sort of retroactive provision is like, I mean, it doesn't necessarily impose a burden on a developer. They could just continue operating under the previous scheme of getting all the rights before beginning construction. So this would be even though you previously moved forward under the belief that you didn't have to do that, now you do. So that doesn't mean that we couldn't do that, but there's a sort of health and safety sort of question where we would have to establish certain potential harms. And given that there's not that many exempt facilities, it's not like there are like zillions of these, the scope of that would be pretty limited. This is just like best practice. From now on, this is how we're going to run things.
How many are there? About, not zillions, millions?
15
Oh.
ish.
And we don't know how many have been constructed versus.
Yeah,
constru-
it's been a while since we've done that research. So yes, at this point, I couldn't tell you exactly, how many are out there and operating, or if they're all operating within the limitations, that they articulated to council. That's probably something that will, that'll be a research project that we undertake, in the near future, maybe after this rulemaking as well. Again, just because we've done it before at a point in time, probably about 10 years ago, we had a good understanding of what that universe was, and we really don't at this point.
Okay, thank you.
And to clarify, if we did a survey at some point, like let's say next year, and it turned out folks were operating in a, in a manner that would not qualify for the exemption, that wouldn't mean that we couldn't sort of like take action, so to speak. It's just we didn't have a process previously, so that I think that would apply. But in terms of like monitoring requirements, yeah, I think that something that makes sense to be going forward.
Thank you. And I think Counselor, if there's no more discussion, Counselor Devlin, it was ready to make a motion.
Yes, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, Chair Condon, I move that the council adopt the proposed exemption rules as presented in the staff report.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Secretary Cornett?
Patty Perry,
Yes.
Richard Devlin,
Yes.
Ken Howe,
Yes.
Cindy Condon,
Yes.
Ann Byer.
Yes.
Motion carries, Chair Condon.
Thank you. Nice work, Mr. Jackman. Thank you for being here for this meeting, for the last meeting. You've been a star performer. And on our agenda, we have a short break at this time. Should we break for 10 minutes, then come back, and that might be leave time for Tom to do his scribing. Yes, do his magic. So it is now 9:40. We'll break until 9:50. Thanks very much. public to address the council regarding any item within council jurisdiction that is not otherwise closed for comment. Item closed for comment include rulemaking, the Klamath Falls Energy Center Notice of Intent, and the Wheat Ridge Renewable Energy Facility 3 Amendment 1 Proposed Order. Let's see. So, per Oregon Administrative Rule 345-011-0020, we established the duration of the time for individual commenters at 7 minutes. But when we know how many people want to comment, we may change that, lengthen or shorten it. The time frame as the length of the meeting and timing and duration of other council business dictate. So, Nancy, do we have comment cards from the room?
Mayor Condon, we do have two commenters in the room at this time. So our first commenter is Troy Jones.
Troy Jones, if you would come to the mic and remember to state your name clearly and address. Thank you.
Good morning. For the record, I'm Troy Jones. I live at 22335 Gap Road in Harrisburg, Oregon. I represent a group of neighbors that we call ourselves Friends of Gap Road. Thank you, Chair Condon and Vice Chair Byer, for the opportunity, and council members for the opportunity to address you today. As stated at last month's FSEC meeting, Muddy Creek Energy Park intends on filing their preliminary application by their May 19th deadline. As we all begin this process of debating the cost versus benefit analysis of Muddy Creek Energy Park, we want to take a moment to thank each and every one of you for your commitment to ensuring the processes and the list of siting standards are maintained. We know it's a daunting process you're tasked with. All this, with each of our lives, twists and turns. Don't think for a moment we don't understand that we're all in this together. After all, there is a human element to these things and these sightings. Rural residents who thought their viewscapes, their ways of life, and were protected from residential, commercial, in our case, industrial scaled projects. Farmers, ranchers, teachers, white collar workers, blue collar workers, who've all lived, invested, protected, and nurtured these lands for hundreds of years with visions for their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren to protect and maintain these properties for generations to come. The rural Oregon dream, the inherent beauty and bounty of the land. And now that way of life is truly threatened for us. Some are even called donut holes by developers due to their commitment to not surrendering to the pressure of big money and ultimately being surrounded by miles of solar panels. This is why Friends of Gap Road promote common sense siting alternatives, like choosing already marginalized locations on non-arable lands and brownfield sites. More importantly, industrial facilities using high levels of energy should be required to place solar panels on the roofs, providing energy back to the grid at their cost and not ours. Common sense alternatives won't negatively impact the health and well-being of our lands like those currently being threatened in Wasco County, Morrow County, and Lane County. We cannot continue to take farmland and wetlands out of the mix for 20 to 40 years. It will cause long-term detrimental impacts. In closing, Friends of Gap Road will continue to bring information before this council in opposition to Muddy Creek Energy Park. Friends of Gap Road will also continue our works legislatively to change laws to protect Oregon's rural land, way of life, and pristine beauty. Thanks again for your time today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jones, for not only testimony today or providing comment today, but your steady presence at our meetings. So thank you.
It's my pleasure. I garner a lot of information, and it's an interesting process, and we certainly understand what you all are tasked with. I want to make sure that we're clear with that.
Thank you. Yes. You're green.
There we go. Mr. Jones, I just want to make sure you understand that the comments you made today and at our meeting last month are not part of the record for that application. And so they're not, it's not information that council may consider when the public, it's not information council. I just want to remind you as well, record is not open for comment. So the comments that he has made may not be considered when you are weighing the application. However, during the application period and the public comment period, that's the appropriate time for you to submit comments on the application.
Certainly understood, Mr. Rob. Thank you.
All right, we have one more commenter in the room, and that is Miss Sydney Villanueva. I probably destroyed that, sorry.
And if you could remember, state your name and maybe spell it and your address. Thank you.
Oh, of course, sure. Thank you, Chair. For the record, my name is Sydney Villanueva. That's Villanueva. My address is 1255 Bayberry Road, Lake Oswego, 97034. And I'm here on behalf of Obsidian today. Thank you for the opportunity to address the council. By way of introduction, I thought I'd just point out I'm an energy attorney that's managed to practice in Oregon for the last 10 years and also avoid working in FSEC. So appreciate the grace with your rules and processes as we work together. I began talking with developers about the pre-construction limit shortly after the president issued the federal executive orders that phase out federal tax credits. As you may know, the concern is that the pre-construction limit could impose unnecessary delay either when obtaining financing or during construction at a time when projects are literally racing to the finish line to obtain federal credits before they disappear. Now, I realize the rules were just discussed, and I'm here to ask the council to continue thinking about their newly drafted pre-construction limit and consider whether additional changes are warranted. Before turning to our concerns, however, I want to emphasize something that you heard earlier from.
Excuse me. So just to clarify, we've had an open public comment period that was noticed. It was closed. So I want to sort of just be very careful that you're not actually providing comments to try to influence the council on the rules that they're still going to discuss. So that comment period is done and we can't allow for new comments. Otherwise, we would have to notice that, open it up for everybody. And that's just not where we're at right now. There was two comment periods, 2 notices to the Secretary of State. There was multiple opportunities to provide comment on these rules. So council is finalizing those rules today. So there's not an opportunity at this point to testify to council in effectively an open comment period.
I'm happy to provide comments in any format that makes sense. And if you, I think I'm hearing you say you'd like me to not talk about the pre-construction limit until the finalized rules have come out, which we will look for an opportunity to do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have no more commenters in the room. Let me check online. All right, at this time, we just have Constance Lee with her hand raised. Connie, I'm going to go ahead and unmute your mic. Oh, nope, you lowered your hand.
No, I'm here.
Perfect. All right, you're on. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Constance Lee. My address is Maupin, Oregon. Do you need my full address? Can you
No,
hear
we have
me? Okay.
Yeah, we have your address. You're fine.
Okay. Today I have a question, and if it's not, and like this is not the right format, that's fine. You can let me know, but I've been really, we are, a lot of the neighbors here are going to be surrounded by a very large solar facility. And in looking at that solar facility, it's really become evident to me the cumulative impact of these projects along transmission lines in rural Oregon. So, for example, in my area, there's going to be over 33,000 square miles of solar in a 25-mile range. And so my question is, when you're approving projects, how do you take in the cumulative impact to the environment, the cumulative impact to the water resources, the cumulative impact to the local economies of agriculture? When you're approving and looking at each one of these facilities individually, is there a process that it has to fit into a bigger scope?
Thank you, Ms. Lee, for that question. Secretary Cornett, do you have anything to add? I mean, I can say that when we certainly look at projects as they come to us individually, but the review that is done is rather deep into what's the situation of water now, what's the situation of ag lands as it is before the project and as the project was represented. So although cumulative is not a designated part of our review, I'd say with every project, we do look at what's gone on in the area. But Secretary Cornett, you've certainly got more experience than I do.
Thank you, Chair Condon. Yeah, there is one standard the council has, which is related to cumulative effects or cumulative impacts, and that's related to wind facilities. So there is no direct specific standard, requirement in statute, and council doesn't have a specific standard for other types of energy facilities or cumulative effects or cumulative impacts. That has been brought up numerous times. Council just does not have any rules related to that. But to agree, Chair Condon, with your sort of assessment, yes, in an area, we look at what the impacts are, directly to a facility, but that also in some respects takes into consideration, the presence of other facilities as well. So if you're looking at impacts to fish and wildlife and other things, that can take that into sort of indirect consideration, but there is no direct cumulative effect evaluation for, say, solar facilities.
So I just feel like this is something that the council needs to look at, and you guys are so great at making rules. As you know, these tax credits are ending. There's this rush to get these facilities approved. And so when you have counties approving facilities and then you have the state approving facilities, and all these facilities are under review, and then there's some facilities that are in operation and parts of facilities that are in operation, but not other parts, I think it's hard. I think there needs to be some way of looking at the big picture, because like, how much is enough? Because it feels for us who live in these small rural communities under transmission lines that more is better, but more is never enough. So that's my comment today.
Thank you very much for that. And what I suggest, and I'm sure you're probably already involved in speaking to your legislator about just that issue. But in our process, as we look at public services, those all have some cumulative. There is cumulative impact, but no standard related to it other than those individual ones. So your legislator legislators may be the direct route to make that comment and perhaps get action on another level.
Yeah, so we've talked to legislatures and, with the governor's executive orders, I don't feel like there's going to be any reviewing. I mean, like, it's build baby build out here. And so I don't feel like that's an effective method for us. But I understand that you guys have to follow your standards, and I appreciate that. I just think we need to be cognizant of the cumulative impacts that are happening to these communities, and how you're looking at one project here, the county's looking at another project. We have 3 projects in review that are all saying they're going to use the same water source, and there's not even enough water for one of them. So I think that there has to be some way of looking at a bigger picture and a more regional view of this, because it's an enormously taking over rural Eastern Oregon, and at some point it will come to a head, right? And I think it would be prudent to get in front of it instead of try to fix the problem in 20 years or 10 years, when all of these are being built and operated and there's not enough resources to support them. So thank you for your time today.
Well, and thank you for your time today and comment.
All right, well, there are no other hands raised at this time. We'll give you a last call. The directions to sign up or to raise your hand are on the screen at this time. All right, Madam Chair, there are no hands raised.
Okay, thank you very much for people who commented. And now we'll move on to our next agenda item. And I know we're all surprised that Tom Jackman will once again appear to discuss tribal communications rulemaking and for final consideration. This is an action item. And Tom, again, is the citing policy analyst and rules coordinator, and he will present the final draft rules for consideration by the council. Thank you. Welcome back.
Long time no see. It's good to be here. Yes, we're here today to discuss the tribal making. This began in 2017 when we were first sort of in discussions with several different tribes regarding some concerns about the adequacy of the council's process in protecting their natural resources, cultural rights, various things, cultural resources. And, some discussions were had, personnel changes occurred during that time period. Folks at the tribes who were spokespersons changed. And this was just sort of on our to-do list. And we decided, there's no reason to sort of delay anymore. So we pushed this out towards the end of 2024. What followed was some discussions with various, they call them cultural resource clusters. And I'm going to go to the next slide. I think I have a slide on that. Yeah. So we attended 2 different cultural resource cluster meetings where we discussed sort of the purpose of this rulemaking and sought feedback. And then we ultimately requested feedback on proposed draft language in December and received some feedback. And then we presented the rules to the public for an opportunity for public comment on those earlier this year. So we are here today to discuss final consideration on those rules. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So just as a review of what we're trying to do here, it's fairly modest in what we're trying to do. It's sort of formalizing good practices, and the existing early process for an application now begins with the notice of intent, which requires a whole bunch of stuff the developer has to do. One of which is to identify any potentially affected tribes. But that's sort of after the project is sort of already, I want to say baked, but you know, in order to propose something, they have to have it sort of constructed, right? In order for the notice of intent. So the whole point of this rulemaking is prior to that sort of expensive, labor-intensive effort to encourage earlier communication with the tribes to direct what ultimately becomes part of the notice of intent, to the extent that it potentially could be impacted by the perhaps existence of resources that the developer was unaware of. And we have seen projects altered down the line as a result of the discovery of tribal resources. So this is just something that makes sense. You know, the earlier in any project, whether it's construction or otherwise, that you identify potential issues that would require your modifications, you know, the less expensive it's going to end up being to make those corrections. This is definitely one of those ounce of prevention, pound of cure type of situations. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So all this rulemaking is asking developers to do is to reach out to, they already have to coordinate with the Legislative Council on Indian Services and to identify potentially affected tribes. So we're just saying, as part of that process, you know, reach out to the folks who are identified. Currently, the way that works is they would identify those and then submit them in an exhibit to staff, who would then reach out to the tribes. So there was no development. Many developers were already doing this, but there's no requirement in existing rules that they reach out to tribes. It would potentially all be sort of handled by the department and staff as part of their research into whether or not the projects were impacting various things, including tribal resources. So this is sort of pushing back on putting it all on staff, so to speak, and encouraging applicants to get involved in this process early. Go ahead and go next slide. So currently, this sort of the way the track changes works, it looks like we're doing more than we are. All I've done is sort of take that section that was in Exhibit Q, move it to A. So A is what's currently they're required to do, is consult with LCIS to identify. And then the new thing is just B, which is that part of what they submit in Exhibit Q is evidence that they attempted to reach out to the tribe. So it's important to clarify that they're not required to actually communicate with the tribes. They're just required to make an effort. So if, you know, we didn't want to be in a situation, and we explained this when we talked with the tribes at the cultural resource clusters, is that it wasn't appropriate to create a requirement that they must communicate with the tribes and then allow the tribes to just not pick up the phone, you know, and stall a project that way. So sort of sensitive to that reality. And it felt like this was an appropriate sort of balanced approach. Any questions on the proposed language? Oh,
Councillor Byer.
you're on.
Thank you. I have to see my little green light.
Yeah.
Just in sub Q, the following evidence regarding, I think the of needs to be canceled.
Yeah, the following evidence regarding, I actually think, sorry, on the draft language, it is not in there. This was just on the slide because I had to do,
Got it.
the slide doesn't have track changes in it. So I just had to
Sure.
manually create it as if they were.
But just for the record, making sure that that reads correctly.
Yeah,
But thank you.
okay.
Not to be misgrammated.
No, yeah, that's appreciate that. But yeah, I do believe that the actual stuff that I've filed with the state excludes the of as well.
Thank you. And actually, my comment was same sentence, and that I thought consultation was inadvertently excised.
No,
Because-
it's an A.
Okay, so the evidence, I mean, there's not much evidence regarding the proposed facility's possible effects. It's the evidence of consultation that we're getting here. And so that's why I thought
Yeah, the possible effects is determined by LCIS, right? So what they're required to do is to prove that they've consulted with LCIS on this.
Hence my,
The actual review of potential impacts occurs during the review process by, just like we do on any other, resource, water. This is as part of the notice of intent, right? So this isn't actually that, this is, Secretary Cornett, you want?
Chair Condon, can I explain?
yeah,
So without the proposed change, the existing requirement is there are 9 federally recognized tribes in Oregon. The reservations of these tribes are not historically where these people lived. So the point of this requirement, current requirement, and then still existing here now in A rather than in the body of the main language, is that the developers have to go to LCIS. LCIS has the knowledge and understanding to determine the historical locations of these tribes, to determine that a project located somewhere, is going to affect, again, not necessarily where the existing tribal reservation lands are, but where historically those peoples lived, because they have interest in that. So that's why, and the current requirement is then, following the notice of intent, we then provide notice and opportunity, and they're essentially a reviewing agency. They have that opportunity to then review all the materials that are submitted to us that we produce. We seek their comment, we're able to reimburse them. The whole point of this original kind of requirement is to identify which of those tribes, again, not currently, but sort of historically could be, that project could affect their interest and concerns. The new language is then to tell the developer, you got to show us that you made some bona fide effort to reach out to those identified tribes before you submit the notice of intent. Because what we continue to hear from tribes, and we agree, early and often notification and engagement. They want to know about these projects early. They want to have an opportunity to be able to tell the developers, you need to be aware of whatever it is that they're concerned about. The developer then, as early as possible, can make changes to their project. The farther along they are in the review process, the more money they've sunk into that project, the more difficult it is for them to make changes to the project. That's why we're proposing to put this language in. Again, it creates an opportunity for the tribes to be able to explain to the developer what their issues and concerns are. As we've said, many of the developers already do this. Some do not, and some have been impacted. Their projects have been severely impacted after actually meaningfully working with the tribes to hear from them. But this is the opportunity to ensure that there is at least a bona fide effort that gets made and that the tribes can communicate to the developer before things get too far.
So
I'm sorry, Councilmember Perry was going to say something. I don't know if you still want to say something. Councilmember Perry probably has more of a better and unique insight than any of us on this. So,
yeah, thank you. For the record, Patty Perry. I just wanted to point out that from having worked with the tribes for many years, that consultation as a word has a little more of a formal connotation to it than just providing notice. So it's like a different consultation is usually more like between government to governments. And if you're, just notifying, it's a little bit different. And I don't think it has any really impact to what's being proposed here. Because the consultation is really between the developer and the legislative commission to get that information from them. But it's not really a formal consultation with a tribe when when a developer is just providing notice and seeking comment on a particular development.
Uh, Thank you, Councilmember Perry. Totally agree, and that's why the language is consultation with LCIS and not the tribe, because we recognize, what we call sort of big C consultation is a different concept. Big C consultation with a tribal government is a very different thing. It's a government to government consultation. That's not something that we staff really are at the level to do. That would be, say, the director of the Department of Energy or the governor's office would be doing a government to government consultation with the tribal entity. In this case, it's simply the developer consulting little c consultation with LCIS to get that information. It's a very good point, and you'll notice that throughout the remainder of sort of the language, anything related to tribal governments does not include the word consultation, because we recognize the significance of that word when it comes to working with tribes.
And just to sort of, I think, loop back around to Councilmember Condon's point regarding what the exhibit is providing evidence for. It's not the evidence on the facilities, proposed facilities effects. It's on the possible effects. So the way you would determine that is to determine the scope of what could be affected is in the possession of the Legislative Commission. They're the ones who have the data on where these potential resources are located. And of course, there's a sort of trickier layer to this in that we don't necessarily know that there are resources in a given location. And so there's questions about, doing surveys and who's going to pay for that, but that's sort of beyond the scope of this rulemaking. This is really about making sure that the folks who have the information get in touch with the folks who need to have information in a timely fashion.
Thank you. And again, part of it is my understanding or misunderstanding about what the Legislative Commission on Indian Services does versus the tribes themselves. And I appreciate the explanation. But here, I want to make sure I understand this, that the Legislative Commission on Indian Services, their responsibility here is only to identify appropriate tribes. It's not resources or anything else. So, and then it's the developer's responsibility to go to the or at least try to make a contact. But they may say March 31st, tried to call the tribe or contact the tribe.
No,
and that's evidence.
Yes.
That's the evidence.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
So one more comment, if I may, for the record, Todd Cornett. We didn't want to create a whole nother step. I mean, so this is where, again, the importance of early, communication is very, very critical and important. And I think to the value of the potential, developer, of that project or the developer of that potential project, but again, we want to be careful that we're not creating the notice of intent is a pre-application step. That's already prior to them having to submit the application. We didn't want to create a pre-application step. So trying to minimize, how this works, what gets done to not create, more burdens on the developers. We were very mindful of that. Again, most of the developers, the ones who are trying to, do the things in the right way, are already communicating with tribes. This just hopefully articulates in rule what most, if not all, are already doing.
Thank you. And actually, I had forgotten about the NOI stage, the different stages. And so there's lots of work moving forward. Okay, thank you. Any other, Councilor Byer?
So if you go back to the slide, the last slide that shows
Right
the
there?
process, yes. So this shows all the different places where tribal governments are involved. We aren't taking anything away. We're just adding this pre-notice notice requirement. So all the other opportunities for engagement remain the same. Thank you.
Yeah.
Excellent point. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're adding a box. We're not changing anything else about the process.
Plenty of opportunity for engagement as the site.
Yeah.
As the developer develops a site application and moves forward or not with the project.
So turning to public comments, we received a comment from OSEA, which is a trade organization that represents solar interests in the state of Oregon. And they supported the requirement for early documented tribal engagement. And they recommended that we basically give them standardized reporting template for what that would look like in terms of this is how they would submit that evidence in that exhibit. And go ahead and go to the next slide. So yeah, they didn't necessarily request that we put that in the rules, and we didn't really think it was appropriate to do that, but are not opposed to looking at potentially providing a form, I don't want to say formal, but just like a process for what would be acceptable in terms of submitting evidence as part of that exhibit. So yeah, I mean, we definitely, assuming this goes forward, would look into ways that we could help developers meet this requirement.
Any further comments or questions from council? Councillor Devlin?
You're muted.
No, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So with that, you need some action.
Chair
Councillor Howe.
Condon, I move that the council adopt the proposed tribe communication rules as presented in the staff report.
Is there a second? Councillor Byer.
I second that motion.
Secretary Cornett.
Richard Devlin,
Aye.
Kent Howe,
Yes.
Ann Byer,
Yes.
Patty Perry,
Yes.
Cindy Condon.
Yes.
Motion carries, Chair Condon.
Thank you. Thank you all for the discussion. And thank you, Mr. Jackman, for another sterling performance.
If it pleases the council, I have the language ready for the modernization consideration, if we want to roll back to that item.
Okay, we're rolling back now to the modernization rulemaking.
And I can bring that up, Nancy, if you could just keep the presentation sort of where you, yeah, that works too. Let me just share my screen again. Oh, okay, yeah. Okay. Let's go to wind it. Okay, that should be the right one. And if you can maximize that again, perfect. And then I'll just zoom in again so we can all see it. So what I've done here, just to make things easy, is I have assumed that council would approve all the other changes. And so this language has accepted all the changes that we previously were presenting. So now the track changes is only the new changes that are up for consideration. So the first one would be taking that sort of definitional thing that sort of ended up at the beginning as a result of removing the other language. And I've just moved it to sit below this as a new 6. Because there wasn't really another, this is one sentence, this rule is one sentence, so there wasn't really a place to tuck it at the end because it goes right into the A and B here with the colon. So I just stuck it there, and then that turned this into 7 down here, which is the retroactivity provision, which I'm now, let's see, just make that a capital S there, but would now just read, Section 5 applies retroactively to all site certificates and site certificate amendments previously approved by council, i.e. notwithstanding this other rule, which states that the council can't modify site certificates. Section 5 takes precedence over any conditions contained in site certificate and so on and so forth.
Councillor Byer.
If you could go back up to make sure we've got the numbering right, so we're still referring to section 5 and not new section 6.
Yeah, this is still 5, so yeah.
And then just,
Then I had to renumber all these, so assume these are all going to get renumbered.
yes.
I mean, I did, I just didn't make them red, but yeah.
Yeah, so the new number The old number 6 is now number 7, so
Correct.
that closed paren would have effect, but that looks so much cleaner and appreciate the changes and presenting them to us.
Yes, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Thank you for taking your break to put that together.
I'm on the clock all day, so we're good. Yeah.
Any further discussion? Counselor Devlin?
No, Madam Chair.
Counselor Byer?
Just for the record, to make it clear that these are not substantive changes, that these are for clarity only, and the intent is to just make the provisions easier to read, that there are no substantive changes.
Thank you, Counselor Byer. Secretary Cornett?
I have so you can refer to the language on the screen. I also have it written, and if somebody wants to make a motion of adopt the rules with changes, I can read the changes after you make the motion.
Great, thank you. Do we have a motion?
Chair Condon, I
Counselor.
move that the council adopt the proposed modernization rules as presented in the staff report and revised to read according to what Secretary Cornett is going to read to us.
Okay, so in subsection 5, move the term "for the purposes of this rule," ... sentence to a new subsection 6. So if you want to scroll, there you go. So then that reflects that. And then in the new subsection 7, remove, quote, "the rule in," end quote, replace and with IE, and then just prior to notwithstanding in subsection,
Just after notwithstanding.
yeah, just prior to notwithstanding, sorry, I didn't get all of that. Add section 5, yeah, after notwithstanding OAR 345.025. So I think sort of a complicated, but we got the two things, or the written about, description of it, and then actually the rules on the screen, which we'll probably just be able to pull off and then pull into the motion language.
Thank you. Hopefully that's clear. Do we have a second?
Chair Condon, this is Counselor Byer. I second the motion.
Any further discussion? I think we're ready for a vote.
Ann Byer,
Yeah.
Cindy Condon,
Yes.
Richard Devlin,
Yes.
Ken Howe,
Yes.
Patty Perry.
Yes.
Motion carries, Chair Condon.
Thank you, Secretary Cornett. And so now moving on to our next item, Mr. Jackman, I think you are excused. Thank you very much for your work on the spot.
Yeah, great job.
Thank you. And next up on the agenda, information items on sale transaction and an overview by Patrick Rowe, Senior Assistant Attorney General and Counsel to FSEC. And he'll provide a brief informational overview of sale leaseback transactions as they pertain to the construction and operation of energy facilities.
Thank you, Council. As you know, in the past, it's a year and a half or so, on about 2 or 3 occasions, Council has been asked to assess whether a certificate holder selling a facility and leasing it back as a tenant would require a site certificate amendment. That triggered Council to request that we just provide an overview of what sale leasebacks are. We explained it during those processes as well, but this is another opportunity to just refresh our recollections of these types of transactions. So I'll provide a brief overview of how they work, in particular in the renewable energy industry, just to provide a bit of additional context. Next slide, please, Nancy. I will also note that when I made this presentation, I used AI to create a couple of these graphics. And this graphic, I said, well, give me a picture of a contract. And it generated that. And I just now translated the first phrase where it says, I don't know if you guys can see it, it says, lorem ipsum dolor sit anetectecte. It's a Latin. I put it into Google Translate. And Google Translate says that means the pain itself is an undetected pain. So take that for what you will. I don't know if they trust Google Translate or not, but I often do when I'm translating other languages. At any rate, what is a sale leaseback? It is a transaction where the owner sells a real property asset, in what we see as an energy facility, to an investor, and then that person who sold it, or that entity that sold it, leases it back to continue operations. Next slide, please, Nancy. So you'd say, well, why do they do this? There are benefits to both parties in the transaction. The benefits to the certificate holder, the project developer, include it gives them enhanced financial stability. They have an immediate cash influx. Unlocks capital, gives them capital to cover either the costs of that project itself, if it hasn't been built yet, or to fund other projects. Unlike loans, sale leasebacks avoid debt, so that helps the developer preserve their balance sheet, reduces the cost of financing in a high interest rate environment, which we have today. And the lease payments that they then make may be tax deductible. So those are benefits to the site certificate holder. What are the benefits to the entity that is purchasing the assets? They get the steady income from the lease payments. Really, I think probably the biggest benefit to them is access to renewable energy tax credits, which have been alluded to a couple times today. It makes them eligible to claim associated depreciation on the asset, and it allows portfolio diversification. Oftentimes, the parties that are the purchasing party purchasing the assets are banks or other companies that have sizable tax liabilities. So they have tax exposure, and they could then use the tax credits to reduce their tax liabilities. The energy facilities themselves, the owners of the energy facility, as you know, are often limited liability companies, which would not have as much tax exposure for tax liabilities, and so they might not have as much of a need for the credits. So that's kind of the incentive on that part. But I would note that, as you'll recall, and that has been mentioned today, just last year, Congress expedited those tax credits. So for commercial, two of them in particular, the investment tax credit and the production tax credit for commercial solar and wind, are now only available for projects that start construction before July 5th of this year. We have talked about that in a number of different instances, or placed into service before January 1, 2028. So as a result of that expedition of those tax credits, I suspect, don't know for certain, but I would suspect that we may see fewer folks coming to us with a request to do a sale leaseback transaction. And really, again, when this has arisen in our context, they've come to us and they've asked, we'd like to do this sale leaseback transaction. Do we need to do a site certificate amendment? And the conclusion that we've reached, and I'll talk about that a little bit more at the end of the presentation, the conclusion we've reached is that an amendment is not necessary. Again, that's how they've come before you. I'm betting that we'll see fewer of those just because of the tax credits being expedited in the manner that they have been. Okay, next slide, please, Nancy. This is just running through two hypothetical scenarios. Example one, let's say it is already an existing constructed solar farm. The developer would sell a 150 megawatt solar farm to a tax equity investor, such as a bank. The lease, then they would then lease it back. It's not always for the life of the facility. My understanding is the lease terms are often 8-10 years. The developer then uses the proceeds from the sale of the facility. If this is already an existing facility, then they might use it to fund new projects. However, this is important for our purposes, typically under these leases, and we know we have seen this because we've asked for these parts of the lease provisions when reviewing site certificate amendments. The maintenance and administrative issues remain the responsibility of the developer, the site certificate holder. In the sale leaseback transaction, the responsibility of the tenant or the lessee. At the lease end, the developer would then buy the facility back from the bank or extend the lease. It's my understanding that typically the project developer, the lessee, continues to sell the generated electricity. Next example, please, Nancy. Pre-construction. So let's say there's a sale leaseback before the facility has actually been built. The developer is planning, in this instance, hypothetical 150 megawatt solar farm. The initial step would be before construction begins, the developer signs a sale leaseback agreement with an investor. The investor agrees to purchase the facility for a certain amount of money once the project is completed, provided it meets specific criteria. Clearly, one of those criteria would be that it's actually placed in service, right? So that they can take advantage of the tax credits and the other benefits that we've discussed. Construction phase, the developer would still act as the builder. Oftentimes, they would finance the construction using a separate short-term construction loan. And then upon completion, that's when it's actually sold to the investor. The developer immediately leases the facility back. They retain operational control, but then they would use that influx of capital that they just received from the sale to potentially pay off the construction costs or utilize it for other projects. Again, this next slide, please, Nancy.
Council Rowe. So,
Chair Howell.
yeah, thank you. In this situation, does the requirement, for the bonding to restore the site, should something happen in the future, go with the original site certificate holder, or that's been sold as part of the buyback?
They are not purchasing the site certificate. They're only purchasing the assets, the hardware. So all of the obligations under the site certificate remain with the site certificate holder, including retirement and financial assurance.
Okay.
And we'll talk about a little bit more about that in these slides.
Okay.
Next slide, please, Nancy. That was a great segue because what are we concerned about? From our perspective, we're most concerned about making sure that this transaction does not impact our ability to enforce the site certificate. So the developer, as I've mentioned, usually will continue to operate the facility, and their responsibilities, including site certificate compliance, remains legally intact, even though this third party holds title to the equipment. Where am I here? I think I'm not, okay. Yeah, I think you might have gone one too far. Boy, well, you don't need the graphics. I can run you through it. So that's the big point that I want to convey is that the site certificate holder's obligations remain. I was trying to think of, well, what might be a concern for us, and this is just me spitballing. And that's on the right, I've noted long-term lease obligations, meaning now the site certificate holder, if they had just owned the facility outright, they wouldn't have lease payments, right? But now they have regular lease payments. So that means that increases their regular fixed costs. So that potentially could impact their then financial ability to make sure that they're complying with site certificate conditions. We have no experience with that having happened. I was just trying to think what how might this transaction make it difficult for compliance? It doesn't change our legal ability to enforce the site certificate and the site certificate holder's obligations. It might give them less capital to ensure compliance. Okay, next slide. Hopefully this one came through. Okay, good deal. So again, the typical site certificate conditions apply to the certificate holder. Their obligations are not affected by whether or not they actually own the facility equipment. And going to your question, council member, how this is actually one of our retirement and financial assurance conditions. And as you see, it says before beginning construction, the certificate holder shall submit to us a bond or letter of credit. And the certificate holder needs to maintain the bond or letter of credit at all times until the facility has been retired. Again, in our amendment determination review process, when you are looking at an amendment determination request or a request for amendment, let's say you are in the context of actually transferring the site certificate, which again, that's not what's happening here. They're not transferring the site certificate. But one of the criteria that you look at in that context in order to say, yes, this process applies, a site certificate transfer process, is you would have to conclude that the new owner is, or, and this is right from one of your rules, is or will be lawfully entitled to possession or control of the site or the facility, right? And that is why we have concluded in the past that these transactions don't trigger the need for an amendment, because in this instance, the investor, the bank, is not entitled to possession or control of the facility. That remains with the site certificate holder. And that's the important aspect of these transactions for purposes of our ability to enforce the site certificate. You don't want to try to enforce a site certificate against a bank that's headquartered in New York. You want to be able to enforce it against the people that are actually on the ground operating the facility. And these transactions don't impact your ability to do that. That is all I have.
Thank you, Councilor Rowe. Different counselor, spelled differently, Rowe. So I don't know if my thinking is correct, but one of my concerns here, and I think I've stated it before, is most of our applications for a site certificate and site certificate holders are LLCs. And LLCs may owe an obligation to their parent company or companies for finance, where the parent company takes the financial some financial consideration from the our site certificate holder. And I guess one of my concerns is that our certificate holder is left with, we have the bond, I get that, or the security instrument. But our certificate holder could be left with no site, no money, no financial resources, no other resources. They don't own the property. They don't own the facility itself. And is the risk that's easier to walk away from, and therefore we become the remediation of sites left abandoned, or if an entity walks away from a site, what's the long-term risk to us for something like that? Or now wildfire, we don't have an insurance standard for facilities, and a wildfire is triggered by something from the site itself. if the leaseholder doesn't have an insurance requirement, we don't have one now. There's that risk as well. Now there's wildfire across the landscape from one of our approved facilities. Don't know how that really enters in here since we don't have an insurance requirement, but those are my concerns out of the box, I guess.
Sure. One comment that one thing you mentioned during that is not having an asset, right? They don't own the asset, but they still get the income from the facility that I
Right.
mentioned. They're still the ones that are selling the electricity and getting the income from the sale of the electricity.
Right.
As far as, and you pointed it out, this doesn't change their obligations under retirement and financial assurance. And as we have on that slide, that applies to the certificate holder. We still have a letter of credit or a bond. That obligation remains.
Mhm.
The insurance wildfire issue is not, this type of transaction doesn't increase or decrease that risk. If there is a wildfire that was caused by a facility, there might be any number of things that cause that. Liability for that isn't determined by you. That would have to be determined in a court, given the number of factors that might come into play. You could, as you pointed out, look into adopting a rule that would try to lessen that risk for neighboring property owners by requiring wildfire insurance. I'm not aware of other states having such a requirement. I do believe Arizona considered it in the last year or two and decided to not go that route. I don't know why. But if that is something that you wanted to do, I believe as Secretary Cornett mentioned last month, that would require a separate rulemaking, and you would definitely want to get a rulemaking advisory committee with an insurance expert. I have no idea how costly such insurance coverage would be. It might be cost prohibitive to the point where you couldn't develop this facility. I don't know, but that is something that would definitely need to be looked at with the proper people providing you input to decide whether or not to go pursue such a course.
Thank you. Food for thought. Any other questions, comments? Councillor Devlin?
No, Madam Chair.
Councillor Byron?
Thank you for the presentation because we have seen a couple of these and I think the distinction between the leaseback versus the transfer of the site certificate is helpful because they're two very different animals. I think always kind of looking back to who's really responsible for meeting the conditions of the site certificate is important. And just for the public to know that, yes, this is who is responsible for meeting those conditions is critical, and knowing that we have some leverage there. So thanks for the presentation. I'm sure as there are more corporate reorganizations and things, we'll have more permutations, but thanks.
So thank you. And Secretary Cornett?
Yep. For the record, Todd Cornett, we're running a little bit early on the agenda, so don't think we're quite ready for the working lunch break yet. So I would recommend that we just move into the next agenda item G.
Okay. So moving on, quicker than our agenda states. Our next item is an action item for Wheat Ridge Energy Facility East, request for Amendment 2, and it's a request to waive in-person public hearing. And Sarah Esterson, Senior Operations and Policy Advisor, is with us today.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Chair Condon, Vice Chair Byer, and members of the council. So for this agenda item, we'll briefly describe the facility, the amendment request under review, and then explain the basis for the in-vicinity waiver related to the public hearing that will be held on the proposed order. Thank you, Nancy. So the Wheat Ridge Renewable Energy Facility East is an approved 300 megawatt wind power generation facility where the site is located in both Morrow and Umatilla counties. 200 megawatts of this facility, which equates to 71 wind turbines, is already built and is in operation. So then remaining that's approved but not yet constructed is 100 megawatts of wind turbines, a battery energy storage system, and then other related electrical and infrastructure systems. A request for Amendment 2, which we received on March 11th, is currently under review. It proposes to split the existing site certificate into two, one that would cover the operational components, one that would cover the unbuilt components. So there's no new construction, no design changes, no site boundary changes, no environmental impacts under review. So there would be a new certificate holder that's an LLC that would be owned by NextEra, which is the similar structure as the existing certificate holder. Okay. So the public hearing requirements on a proposed order and the amendment process are established in Division 27-0367, and it indicates that council has to hold a public hearing in the vicinity of the facility unless it's deemed unnecessary. And then the criteria for waiving the hearing is if the amendment is limited in scope, there's a clear lack of public interest, or there's a public health or safety risk like COVID or severe weather, you can waive the in the vicinity requirement. So note, this isn't a waiver of the hearing itself. It's a waiver of the proximity in the vicinity obligation. So our analysis and rationale for the request to waive the in vicinity is that the amendment request is predominantly administrative, splitting of a site certificate. It doesn't alter design, construction, operational impacts. You have processed several amendments of this nature, specifically for LLC certificate holders owned by NextEra, and we haven't experienced much, if any, public interest in that type of change. And I think for those reasons, we're recommending that council waive the in vicinity requirement. Now, just to note, it could be that we are traveling out to Eastern Oregon for the meeting and we end for another project and we end up being in the vicinity, but right now that's not forecasted given the timeline. Okay, so now it's your turn to decide. We have two options on the table. You can recommend waiver of the in vicinity or reject that proposal.
Any comments, questions, concerns? Oh, Secretary Cornett, did you have it? Oh, you're green. So
Just ready for the vote.
I do have just one question. Could you elaborate on the evidence for a lack of public interest?
I think that we're basing that on prior amendments that were limited to the administrative split. Most recently with the Wheat Ridge Renewable Energy Facility 3 proposed order where that hearing was held in March and we only had one public commenter and it was fairly limited in applicability to the amendment request itself.
Okay, thank you. And just a comment for me, it's not that as Ms. Esterson said, the hearing is still going to be held and anyone would be allowed to speak on it. It's just in a virtual hearing.
Well, and we'd actually still be in person. We're not requesting to waive in-person obligation. It's just the locational element.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So any other questions? I think we are ready for a vote.
Chair Khan,
Yes, a motion.
This is
Sorry.
Kent. Pursuant to OAR 345-027-0367, I move that council waive the in the vicinity public hearing for the Wheat Ridge Energy Facility East Amendment Number 2 for the reasons presented and recommended by staff.
We have a second? Counselor Perry.
Aye.
Council Perry, I'll second that motion.
Thank you, Counselor Perry. Counselor Devlin, she beat you to the button, I think. Thank you. Now we're ready for the vote.
Cindy Condon,
Yes.
Kent Howe,
Yes.
Patty Perry,
Yes.
Ann Byer,
Yes.
Richard Devlin.
Aye.
Motion carries, Chair Condon.
Thank you, Secretary Cornett.
And Chair Condon, just one kind of follow-up note, if I may. And I articulated this, we had a similar request at the last council meeting. And just again, going back, you know, to our prior rules where we had amendment type A and amendment type B. And amendment type B did not include a public hearing at all. It was just a written public comment period. So I forecast that we're going to see, you know, more of these, and we as staff, even if the applicant or the certificate holders are not making a request, I think we will be making these with some frequency on these types of amendments, just because, again, going back to the type B, which didn't even have a public hearing at all, just a written comment period, you know, we do believe that, you know, if there is a need, we absolutely want to be there in person. We think giving that opportunity for people. And, you know, based upon kind of our experience, you know, as Sarah articulated, you know, I think we can reasonably forecast, I can't guarantee that we're always going to be right, but we can reasonably forecast, you know, with what these would have previously been type B amendments, that they're probably not going to have much interest and concern. And, you know, it's a lot of expense to go to a particular location. And that creates some flexibility for us then to not have to go to those locations. Again, council doesn't have to agree. We will always take these to council. And if we hear back all of a sudden that there is a lot of interest, you know, in that, say we start that public comment process, we may reverse course and propose to council that we actually do hold a in-person, you know, in vicinity public comment hearing. So I think this is, you'll see more of these. And again, I just wanted to reiterate kind of the, you know, looking back at our prior rules, how this would have fit into those prior rules. This very likely would have been a type B. I'm sure the certificate holder would have requested a type B amendment, and I believe that we probably would have agreed with that.
Thank you for that explanation. So, thank you. So.
Thank you.
do we
Still
wanna
early in the
continue?
agenda, so
Wanna
moving fast.
go
So
through
I
it?
think we can move to the next one. I don't know, when do we have? So it should be coming soon, but I think we're probably good to move to the next agenda item.
Okay, moving right along, the next item on the agenda is another action item, and it's on the Bigelow Canyon Wind Farm request for Amendment 4, and we have a petition for rehearing. Chris Clark, Senior Siting Analyst, and Patrick Rowe from the Oregon Department of Justice, Senior Assistant Attorney General, are with us today for this item. Chris, welcome.
Thank you, Chair Condon, council members. For the record, my name is Chris Clark. I'm a senior siting analyst with the department. And today the council is considering a petition for rehearing on the final order on request for Amendment 4 of the site certificate for the Bigelow Canyon Wind Farm. If I could get my slide. Thank you. So the council issued the final order on March 27th, 2026. As a reminder, the Bigelow Canyon Wind Farm is an operational 450 megawatt wind energy facility in Sherman County. The final order authorizes the construction and operation of a solar photovoltaic power generation facility with up to 125 megawatts of generation capacity, a battery energy storage system, and other related or supporting facilities within a 1,924 acre solar micrositing area at the approved site boundary. The order was served to all parties and persons who commented during the public hearing on the proposed order on April 2nd. And then on April 4th, 2026, Kathy and Kevin McCullough submitted a petition for rehearing on the final order. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Rowe to review the statutes and rules governing rehearing and reconsideration, which are forms of administrative review.
Thank you, Chris. And I will say at the outset, this will be mind-numbingly administrative law-like, not like, but if I can walk you through this to the point where you're tracking, then I'm going to ask each of you for a recommendation that I can act as an adjunct law professor in administrative law at one of our law schools. So again, as Chris mentioned, we have received a petition for rehearing of your decision granting Amendment 4. And that took us by surprise because we didn't think that such a petition was allowed on amendments. And I was tasked with looking into that and following as my explanation. We still continue to believe that such petitions are not a procedural step here, and I will endeavor to walk you through why that is. So the applicable statutes are here on the screen. ORS 469-4031 says any party or limited party to a contested case proceeding may apply for rehearing. Okay, we know that's not what has happened here. There has not been a contested case proceeding, so that statute does not authorize a petition for rehearing. That would allow a petition for rehearing if there was on a regular application, the original application for a site certificate, and if there were a contested case, then this statute would allow for participants in the contested case to seek rehearing. All right. And perhaps before I continue, I should step back and provide just a brief explanation of rehearing and reconsideration, two different terms. Okay. So rehearing occurs when an agency holds an entirely new hearing and redecides a matter, okay, based solely on that new hearing record, or the agency holds a new hearing, a supplementary hearing, and would redecide the matter based on the original record and the record developed at a supplementary hearing. Rehearing might be appropriate, for example, if a person asserts they have new evidence that wasn't available while the record was open and it's relevant to the agency's decision. Okay, that's rehearing. Reconsideration occurs when an agency, based on the existing record, re-examines the facts or the legal basis for its order. So it's existing record. You're not taking in new evidence. You're saying, all right, it's basically, you're doing what the word says. You're reconsidering, you're re-examining the facts and legal basis for your decision. That might be appropriate if the order seems inconsistent with a past practice, but doesn't explain why. If you believe that you misinterpreted the law, or if you believe that you misstated facts in your order on which a conclusion was based. Again, rehearing and reconsideration are only a step in the process if they're called for in a statute or in a rule of the agency. They're intended as much to be an aid to agencies as they are to the public. In other words, it's an opportunity for an agency to hit pause and say, we'd like to give this a second look before it goes on to judicial review. Right? Because that is definitely the next step in the process, regardless of whether or not an agency grants reconsideration or rehearing. The next step is always judicial review if the person wishes to appeal.
Quick question. Do we have a parallel statute for reconsideration, or is there anything in the FSEC statutes or administrative rule that permits reconsideration? Because this is all new to me.
Yep, there is, and we're going to get to the rule in a moment. There's not in the statute. So now let's again go back to the statutes. We talked about 469-403 that says rehearing You can petition for rehearing after a contested case. We know that's not what happened here. The other statute that's relevant to this analysis is 469-4051, and it says, notwithstanding these two other statutes, judicial review of the council's approval or rejection of a request for an amendment or a decision related to or arising from a contested case on an amendment, regardless, this is the important language, regardless of whether a contested case was held, is conferred solely on the Supreme Court. So this statute, at least unlike 403, acknowledges that you may have made a decision and there wasn't a contested case, right? It's recognizing that happens in your process. Unlike 403, which says you can petition for rehearing, this is silent on that issue entirely. So in the context when a contested case was not held, the statute only talks about judicial review, not this additional administrative process of rehearing or reconsideration. So collectively, what do we know then? Again, we know that under 403, it's clear that the ability to request a rehearing is only available following a contested case. That's not what happened. Under 405, which addresses proceedings where a contested case was not held, it does not state that petitions for reconsideration or rehearing may or must be filed prior to judicial review. Okay, so under the statutes, there's really no argument that can be made that a petition for rehearing or reconsideration is available. But there is a rule that we need to look at. Yeah, next slide, please. So this rule was first adopted in 1992. It was last amended in 1999. And I think that's worth knowing because we have a lot of rules, right? And a lot of rules sometimes collect dust and you don't give them any thought until some factual scenario pops up that requires you to look at them. And that's what we have here. This says, and the important language is what I have placed in italics, a person entitled to judicial review under ORS 183484 may file a petition for reconsideration or rehearing. Okay. And let me read the whole thing actually. If you're entitled to judicial review under ORS 183484 of a final order in other than a contested case, you may file a petition for reconsideration or rehearing. Well, that is what we have here. You issued an order approving the site certificate amendment. There wasn't a contested case, right? So that should be considered an order in other than a contested case. And it says you can file a petition for reconsideration or rehearing. But the critical language there is if you're entitled to judicial review under ORS 183484. Okay. ORS 183484 is a statute that's falls under what is known as the Administrative Procedures Act. Okay, so the Administrative Procedures Act is the general statutes that apply to all agencies, procedural statutes that govern agency proceedings. The right to judicial review in this instance does not arise directly under 484. It arises under the two statutes that we just looked at, okay? It's important to understand when you're talking about it. So we have an Administrative Procedures Act statute, but then we have statutes that are specific to FSEC, the two that we just looked at. Remember the one that said you get a petition, you can file a petition for review or rehearing if there was a contested case, and the second statute specific to FSEC that acknowledges there may be instances where you made a decision and there wasn't a contested case, and that only talks about judicial review. It doesn't talk about petitions for rehearing or reconsideration. Those are the statutes that give rise to judicial review of the decision you made. This is a general APA statute that would apply if there weren't statutes specific to the FSEC process. But there are statutes that are specific to the FSEC process, and those are the statutes from which a person has the right to judicial review of your decision. So because of that, we don't believe that this rule applies or grants the ability to petition for judicial review. Okay. So all that said, we still acknowledge that this rule does leave some ambiguity. Okay. And this rule also says council may grant or deny a petition by such a petition by summary order. Okay. So even if someone makes such a petition, which was what we have, you aren't automatically obligated to consider it. You may grant it or you may deny it, or you can take no action whatsoever. If you take no action, the petition is deemed denied, or you have the discretion to grant it or to deny it by summary order. Summary order means you can just say, yes, we're going to grant it, and then you would go through that process that I described of reexamination, or you can deny it. But summary order means you can do it without any explanation. You don't have to articulate, you don't have to provide what would be equivalent to like a final order where you explain how you reached your conclusion. Summary order just means yay or nay, up or down. Next slide, please, Nancy. Okay, so remember, under the rule we just looked at, you can only file a petition for rehearing or reconsideration if you're entitled to judicial review under that APA Administrative Procedures Act statute. Because the right to seek judicial review of the council's decision on a request for amendment is expressly established under the ORS 469 statutes that we looked at, the department does not believe that the rule that we just reviewed, OIR 345-00180, we don't believe it applies, and there's no ability to request a rehearing or reconsideration when you make a decision on an amended site certificate. Nevertheless, because there is at least an argument that the rule leaves ambiguity as to whether or not rehearing or reconsideration is available, the recommendation is that you in fact do decide whether or not to grant it and that you deny the petition, right? So that is a long-winded way of getting around to our ultimate explanation was, even though we think there is no right to petition here, because there's some ambiguity, we recommend that you we're not recommending that you evaluate it, as Chris is going to go into in a moment. What we recommend that you do you issue an order denying it, which, as I just pointed out, is one of the steps you can take under that rule. Okay. Do you have any questions about that?
I do have a question. So can you go back to the previous slide? So I'm presuming, always dangerous for me to do that, that the 3 stars, so 2 and 3 have no bearing on what we're looking at.
Yeah, not relevant. I can't recall what they say right now, but the reason why I included the ellipses was because they wouldn't be relevant to this analysis.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair?
Councilor Devlin.
Yes, Madam Chair. Council, if we deny the request for a rehearing, will we cite the basis for that, or will we simply deny?
We have again, the rule says you can do it by summary order. And so it doesn't go into the explanation of why you're denying it. But if someone wanted to understand it, they could certainly come back and revisit this presentation that I just made and that Chris will be presenting in a moment here as well.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Councilor Perry?
Question for Council Rowe. I'm wondering if if there's some ambiguity involved with whether or not it's even something that would apply to, requiring us to take action on a petition for rehearing. If it's done through a denial process, would that kind of set precedent as far as creating the idea that, okay, it does apply because we're actually taking action on it. So it seems to me like it might be even better to just not take action.
Yes, I agree. I agree. And that is something that we considered doing. And originally we were thinking of just don't take any action on it. Ultimately, we decided because that this is the route that we would take with the idea in mind that we are now going to revisit that rule and make sure that it's clear that it does not apply to this instance.
Further discussion or questions, comments? Okay, thank you for that. And now moving on to more explanation.
Thank you, Chair Condon. Yes, we did want to just briefly review the petition itself and the issues it raises. So the petition is provided in your packet, so hopefully you've all had the chance to review it. In that petition, the petitioner asserts that the council abused its discretion and failed to make findings supported by substantial evidence on 3 issues. One, that the council found that the wildfire mitigation plan was adequate without stronger mitigation and oversight provisions. That the council accepted a revised vegetation height limitation without requiring permanent operational plan and incorporation or larger water capacity at the storage tanks, I'm presuming. And 3, that the council relied on PG's representations regarding organizational expertise, we're presuming, despite maintenance failures at the existing facility. The petition also identified several requirements which the petitioner asserts should have been incorporated into the amended site certificate. All of those issues were evaluated in the final order, and the petition itself identifies the places in the records where those issues are evaluated. Most of those were, all of the issues were also evaluated in the comment evaluation, which was presented to the council at your meeting on March 20th and was incorporated into the final order as final order attachment B3. So we believe while the petition identifies areas where the petitioners would have liked to see a different outcome, we do not believe it identifies issues or arguments that were not fully considered by the council in its final decision, or that it identifies good cause to consider new issues or argument which would be appropriate for a rehearing. Even if it was available in this proceeding, the department recommends that neither reconsideration or rehearing are appropriate. So in summary, we are recommending the council deny the petition for 2 reasons. One, as Mr. Rowe explained, under the applicable statutes, petitions for reconsideration or rehearing are only available to parties or limited parties in a contested case. And in the alternative, even if the rule that was summarized was applicable, the petition does not raise an issue that merits reconsideration or rehearing. And again, as Mr. Rowe explained, if the council agrees with our recommendations, the department recommends the council enter a summary order denying the petition.
Councilor Breyer.
So we do the summary order. Do we in any manner refer to these reasons or just say denied?
Yeah, we have that drafted actually, and I'm pretty sure I drafted it consistent with what the rule says, a summary order. So it just says denied. But again, anyone that wants to better understand it could just review the meeting recording.
Right. And then the next question is, we deny it is that appealable at all? Or-
So the impact of the denial of the petition, right, doesn't impact your final order. The final order is stands, but the denial of the petition would then trigger the deadline for appealing the order approving, and they would have 30 days if they chose to seek judicial review.
Okay, and then follow up, we probably just need to get this on our rulemaking calendar pretty darn quick. I know that Tom is up to his.
You don't want to go through this analysis again?
It's a great analysis, and thank you so much for the work, because when I first heard about this petition, I was like, I haven't seen one of these. Does it bite? But no. So thank you for the clear explanation.
So just a response to that point, we totally agree with that. We want to get that on our rulemaking calendar. There may be some connectivity between that rule and our compliance rules. So we're going to look to that and see, if there is a relevant connection there. And if there is, then we will deal with that with our ongoing compliance rulemaking. If not, if we can't make that connection, then we'll be looking to figure out a way to deal with that, sooner rather than later.
Thank you. Further discussion? Counselor Howell.
I kind of like to explain the order or the motion. Not that it's findings of fact or anything like that necessarily, but it kind of is. Are you recommending not to do that?
What we could do, if you go back to you've explained it in the motion.
Yeah.
And so if you wanted to, in the order, is just include the language that's in the motion in the order. I would want to revisit that, but I think that
I
would
could throw
probably-
something out, and if you recommend,
I'd rather be. the
There's
one
not
that
a
would grab
second.
that and then have you guys look at it. But if you go back to the motion language that Chris just said, I mean, that is the. Right, the
Counsel-
staff
I have
recommendation.
it here.
Oh, Council Member Howe, if I may, are you asking if the motion language should be revised or if the
No.
order should be revised?
The motion itself is kind of just simple summary, order denying the petition. That's kind of all there is to that. But I was wanting to kind of just throw in there the two main reasons
Which are the two you
Which
see
are
on
the-
the screen?
and just briefly kind of summarize that as the reasons why.
Yeah, I think it would be appropriate to include these two reasons
Okay.
in the order. I think going beyond that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do that in the order.
Right.
Again, you don't have to provide any explanation.
Yeah.
In the order.
Yeah.
And I'll say that is fairly common. Summary orders are common in judicial processes. They're not satisfying for people.
Yeah.
But you have the right to just say approve it or not. And again, in this instance, you have the right to not do anything.
Yeah.
With this, and then it would be deemed denied.
Exactly.
The benefit of taking this action, and kind of goes a bit back to Councilmember Perry's comment, is now the McCulloughs have certainty as to what your decision is, rather than just waiting to see if you take any action on it. Now they know that you have denied it, and now they know they have 30 days to appeal to the Supreme Court. So that is a benefit of taking the action that you take, that we're recommending that you take.
Yeah.
But if you want to supplement it, I wouldn't go beyond supplementing it to include these two statements that you've already included in your motion.
Okay, I'm going to throw something out, and
So, just real quick, because you use the term summarize, what I would say is if you want to make a motion and modify the existing motion, not summarize those, but read them verbatim.
okay.
Excuse me, would it be better for us to take a lunch break and get that down easier to read? Or are you comfortable with making the motion and referring to the screen?
That's totally fine. I was just going to also add to that, that it doesn't the petition didn't present any evidence or argument that wasn't already previously heard. And that's not quite in there.
It's really is number 2.
Yeah, I was going to beef that up just a little bit by saying,
I'd rather not do
Don't
that
do-
because now what you're doing is you're trending into territory of actually having considered it, right?
got it.
Okay.
Okay.
But that's not, you're not considering it. To actually consider it, you would now have Chris do the presentation he did last month. You would compare the allegations versus the actual evidence. So you're not reconsidering it. You're saying we're not reconsidering this. Okay. It does not merit us reopening and revisiting the evidence. You wouldn't be reopening you would just be making a decision based on the existing evidence. But we want to trying to stay away from that, because if you were to do that, then you would have to then issue another order affirming your decision to approve the amendment.
Okay, I didn't want to make this worse, so I'm going to read verbatim. Under ORS 469.403 and 469.405, petitions for reconsideration or rehearing are only available to parties or limited parties in a contested case. And even if OAR 345-001-0080 were applicable, the petition does not raise an issue that merits reconsideration or rehearing of the final order. And I move that the council deny Kathy and Kevin McCullough's petition for rehearing and issue an order denying the petition
For those reasons.
for those reasons.
Yeah. And you'd like to include those reasons in the order.
And I'd like to include those reasons in the order.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Counselor Byer.
Chair Condon, I second that motion.
Any further discussion? Secretary Cornett?
Cindy Condon,
Yes.
Patty Perry,
Yes.
Ann Byer,
Yes.
Richard Devlin,
Yes.
Ken Howe.
Yes.
Motion carries, Chair Condon.
Thank you. Thank you all for that. And given that, I can't believe we're done already. Is there anything further we need to discuss before we break for lunch and adjourn the meeting and break for lunch? No? Okay, the time is now 11:33 p.m. or a.m. and the April 17th, 2026 meeting of the Energy Facility Siting Council is now adjourned. Thank you very much for your presence here, those of you in the room, and thanks for those of you that joined us by the WebEx or on the phone. We are adjourned.